to move forward is to find out what's the hurdles. And I think family systems and a systems understanding of emotions and life and how people interact on a deeper level, if you can understand the downsides and understand those things that you weren't used to looking at, you can really move forward.
Welcome to the Time Has Come podcast. My name is Graham Wardle, and today I'm joining you all the way from Mexico. I have an amazing podcast for you all. It's with a gentleman named Jerry Wise. Jerry is a self-differentiation and family systems certified coach with over 45 years of experience. He also has a YouTube channel with over 18 million views across all his videos. It's fascinating. He helps people break free from dysfunctional family systems. My favorite part of this episode, though, was learning about how to uncover the downsides to letting go of a negative emotion or behavior. And you wouldn't think there are downsides, but there are. There's actually a hidden benefit that keeps us holding on to these things, and I loved learning about it. So in this episode, we're going to explore the journey of self-differentiation, coming home to yourself, how to cultivate more peace and purpose in your life, and so much more. The time has come to welcome Jerry Wise to the show.
Mr. Jerry Wise, thank you for being a part of the podcast. Thank you for being here. Thank you for taking the time to chat with me here and dive into everything that you have, all your wisdom and your knowledge of 45 years of experience. I'm really excited to chat with you. You're making a face
that
there.
Sounds like a lot.
I'm excited to start with you in like an origin story. I come from a film background, so I always, when I interview guests, I kind of think of them as like, if this was a film and I was watching a movie, what would be Jerry Wise's origin story? Where did he start? Was there a moment in your childhood where you're like, you know what, this is what I want to dedicate my life to, helping people, supporting people?
I think I was raised and programmed from my own family, which had some loving parts and some dysfunctional parts, which is not unusual for so many people. Then some people have malignant families that are just awful mostly. You know, I didn't quite have that, but I had plenty of problems, my family growing up. So I was kind of programmed to be a codependent, kind of to please everyone. And that was kind of my family role and things like that. What I was supposed to do is just to make sure everybody in the world is happy. That's was my role. And then I ended up becoming a pastor and a priest, a bishop, because then I need to make everybody happy in the entire world. So that's all I was asked to do, you know, or felt I should do. Of course, that's a pretty big job if you've ever tried it. Terrible. To have to please everyone and to, and in my case, in the religious background, get everybody saved in the whole world. That's all. That's no big deal. So, and I hadn't even saved myself. So that made it even more difficult. So early on, grew up in a small Midwestern town, very small, but it was a nice town and fairly affluent town. And my dad was the principal, so I was a principal's son. That was great fun. I wouldn't advise that for people. It's basically coming from a rival school. So we came from a rival school to the school, and
even more fun.
Even more fun. And of course, then you got to leave all your friends that you had in grade school, and these people have all been together for 6-7 years or whatever, and then try to break into that. So I felt pretty insecure, didn't really know my place, and never really felt like I fit in or did know my place. So having a self was not something that was natural to me. And it caused a lot of problems because then you have guilt, shame, reactivity, it's just all kinds of difficulties. And I didn't know what to do about it. With the effort of trying to fix myself, make myself whole, find a self. If I don't know what to do, well, then God must know what to do. So I'll just let him decide. Well, I'm not sure he totally works that way, where you just abdicate what, where you're going, and he just steps in and does it all for you.
Does it for you. Wouldn't that be nice?
I was hoping he would do that, but he did not. And, or at least there were times I thought he did, but I think I was probably misled. I am not happy in the church. I'm not happy being the boss. I'm not happy enforcing all the rules. And that's just not a role I want to be in, and resigned as a bishop, which they had never had before. And that was kind of a beginning of self-differentiation and learning to be a self. And I had a wonderful professor in seminary who was my supervisor professor, professor of psychology, Lutheran pastor, psychologist, wonderful man, and knew about Murray Bowen family systems, which I had never heard of. I had no idea what he even talking about. That doesn't make any sense. But every time he gave a lecture, every time he talked like no other professor or teacher I've ever heard. And I go, what is it he knows that I don't know? I'd sure like to know that. Whatever it is, and I don't know what it is, but I'd like to find out. So I began to learn more about self-differentiation and a family systems approach to healing and recovery. And throughout this time, then I decided I would become a therapist so I could leave the church. So I wouldn't just end up homeless like Dad thought I would. And so I became a therapist and went to pastoral counseling, went to a graduate degree in marriage and family therapy. And so with that beginnings, I began to really work hard on self-differentiation and helping others with that. Because of all the different things I tried to get better, to be whole, this was the one thing that made the difference.
Awesome.
And I've been preaching it ever since. And I find a lot of people give me good feedback they give me the feedback I was giving back to Dr. Stoneberg, the professor. That's the very things I would say to him, they're now saying to me. So it doesn't make my head big. It's just I know that's how that feels. If somebody really gives you an answer to something, you're just very, very grateful. I'm not a genius. I'm offering a way to think about life, recovery, being mature, healthy, and whole in a way that most therapists, and I've trained therapists for years, don't learn in school. They just don't learn in school because the way to be the best therapist is to fix yourself. But how many therapists want to do that?
Yeah, to lead by example.
I'm not putting therapists down. I love therapists. I have therapist friends. It's just I know that's hard work.
Yeah, this is fantastic. I'm just so excited to get into all the meat of this conversation and to bring people up to speed with your work. Obviously, they heard a bit about you in the intro there before the podcast started. But I really want to dive into because a lot of your videos that have had real traction online that I was doing some research on and looking at your work is around this concept of narcissism or having a narcissistic parent or a family member and this sort of dynamic in your family life that, like you also mentioned, the self-differentiation that doesn't allow you to have that sense of self. And so can you paint the landscape here for us for somebody maybe that's not aware of, this is an issue for them. They know something's off, but they're not quite sure. Can you kind of lay the landscape out of what this is like for people, the symptoms, the repercussions of what this might be like for someone who struggles with this in their family?
Narcissism is a popular topic these days. And I will get criticisms and people will write things online and say, oh, why are you're making everybody into a narcissist. Well, of course, I don't make anybody a narcissist. I simply talk about the symptoms. And actually, believe it or not, I want to talk about narcissism and I'm educated in that, knowledgeable about that. And narcissism is, of course, a personality disorder that includes, no empathy or very little to no empathy, no shame, no guilt, though they are wreaked with shame, but they won't show it. They won't. Very self-centered, self-absorbed, can be moody and just could be mean, very controlling. Now, there are different types of therapists too. So different types of narcissists. So it's kind of a wide field and you can have and narcissism is also on a continuum. So you can have a malignant narcissist. You can have kind of a milder, covert narcissist. So we have a continuum. But the whole point for me was, if you grew up in this background, I want to offer you something that would help you, truly help you with your recovery from those traumas and those difficulties. I did that also as kind of an ACOA specialist, adult child of alcoholism. I worked as a family counselor, family therapist in a rehab center for a number of years for alcohol and drug abuse. So I have that background. And I worked in a psychiatric practice. So I worked in that practice as a kind of the psychiatric family therapist, and for inpatient and outpatient. And so I have a wide variety of experiences professionally. So I can bring all that when I talk and when I work with clients. And I found that to be helpful to a lot of people. But the main thing is going and talking to someone who's grown up with these painful experiences of growing up with narcissistic parents that can be quite cruel and quite abusive, very discounting. There's lots of dysfunctional families. And having been a marriage and family therapist, I know about different dysfunctional families, and narcissism is not the only one. There are many. However, if you're talking about family systems, the underlying problem or problems are the same, whatever type of dysfunctional system you have.
Oh, interesting.
Whether you have alcoholism or whether you have narcissism. Generally, what's underneath the system, it just happens to poke its head out in a different way. But the universals are the same. And those might be enmeshment, reactivity, intergenerational trauma, those kinds of things, except this family then becomes a narcissistic family. This family becomes an abusive family. This family becomes an alcoholic family. Now, does that mean none of those need specialized treatment? No, they do. And I work with all those, even inpatient. But I also found in a family systems approach, if I know what's underneath all of it, I can be much more helpful with the roadmap than if I only know about alcoholism.
Yeah.
Adult children of alcoholics, or narcissism only. So I've kind of always worked with people who have very difficult parents. And so that's why I kind of went with narcissistic approach, because I know that's one that I'm familiar with and a lot of people are also. And I basically talk about people in terms of the symptoms. It's not about you should diagnose everybody with this, or I'm giving you this information to diagnose. I'm simply saying, if it walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it's more than likely a duck. But that's not where we stop. Everybody goes, oh, well, you just labeled everybody. That's not where I'm stopping. No. I'm saying, now, what do you do? What do you do? Not how do you fix them or sort them out? And self-differentiation is about self-focus, system focus. It's not about other focus. And many other approaches are other focused. Well, I'm just so upset what my mom did. What she did was awful. I agree with you. It was terrible. Well, how am I going to get over it? Well, I think you're going to change. Yeah, but she's still like as she is. Yeah, she probably always will be. Now what are you going to do? Let's talk about you and how you can get that out of you. And that's why I talk about how to get the family of origin out of you. So narcissism is kind of where I start and then help them understand the universals and family systems and things like that.
This is fantastic, Jerry. Thank you for sharing all this. There's so many things I want to pick apart and dive into and chew on. Let's start with actually one of my favorite questions I was going to get to later, but it was something that I saw you brought up. And it was this way of framing, helping somebody, like you just gave an example there of somebody who's having difficulty with their mom. There was a question that you gave. It was a way of saying something of and forgive me if I'm paraphrasing it wrong. What are the downsides to giving up this shame or this guilt? Can you talk about this? Because I love this question, and it's such a juicy one to kind of chew on.
I like paradox.
Yeah.
And paradox works well with a family systems approach. Systems can work well with paradox because systems that just keep operating the same, we need to do something different so it doesn't keep operating the same. That's in any system. Well, a paradox is often why we stay stuck, because we only see one part of it, not the other. And a family systems approach, you always want to look at what are the upsides of doing this, what are the downsides of doing this? Because systems are all about upsides and downsides. Every problem you experience is a solution. Every solution that you've come up with has a problem with it. And that's just the way life is. That's human life. That's the universe, the way the universe is put together. So, and that's okay. We don't have to be afraid of that. I mean, we want to learn from that and have wisdom. So when somebody comes to me and say, my mother treated me badly and I just feel angry with her and resent her, and I always feel guilty all the time when I'm near her or around her. Okay, I got you. Now, I'm also knowing this as an adult now. Mom's an adult. She's an adult. Wait a minute. The rules change when you become an adult. I didn't say the rules got easier. I said they changed. So I didn't say it was easy to do things. And there's nothing I tell people to do that I haven't had to do. That's the good news, because I can't take you any farther than I've gone. And that's, again, a Bowen Family Systems approach. And unfortunately, too many therapists haven't gone very far. So that's why you might get limited effectiveness with some therapists. And again, I love therapists. I work with some really good ones. And I'm not a perfect therapist. That's the other good thing. I don't have to be a perfect therapist, which is wonderful. I don't have to have all the answers. The best thing I can be with you is to be me. Mm-hmm. That's the most enlightening thing I can do for you, because it's the path for you to take.
Yeah.
But it's not always easy. So we get back to, okay, the paradox. So I always feel guilty. I always feel, oh, mom, she just looks at me and I feel guilty, which was true in my own family. And I remember a therapist who was an excellent systems therapist that I had found. And he said, well, Jerry, it sounds like you're not ready to give up that guilt yet. What do you mean I'm not ready? Of course I'm ready. That's why I'm coming to see you. I am ready. And he said, well, just coming to see me doesn't mean you're ready. It means you're readier, but it doesn't mean you're ready. And I said, well, I don't know how to let this guilt go. And he was wise enough, which I use now also, because it's not a how question. It's a when question. It's not how do you let go of the guilt. It's like you coming to me and say, hey, Jerry, how do I breathe? Well, Graham, you need to kind of, how am I going to tell you how to do that? So it's not a how question, it's when. And I'm going, when? Well, I'm ready to let go of that guilt. He said, okay, then go ahead. I said, well, I don't know how. Yeah, when I'm going back to that, I don't know how. He said, the only reason you don't know how is because you are not ready. So I want you to say, I am not ready to give up this guilt I feel with mom yet. And a calm came over me. I was more at peace. It felt a little embarrassing because I was admitting that I wasn't ready to give that up yet. But it felt more I was together with myself. And if you get together with yourself and not neurotically thinking I'm ready when you're not, which is neurotic, then you'll just be caught in this knot. But when you accept that, then you start moving towards more readiness. And so I'm not ready to give up that guilt. And then I kept saying that and saying that and saying that, and also began to realize, oh, this is a choice. This is a choice. This is not just There's no magical method. When are you ready to stop feeling guilty about that? And I know I may sound harsh or I may sound mean or, or that, but what other way is there? I mean, I've read 1,000 books and more. There is no answer for that. Now, are there things about what you can do to help get yourself ready? Well, I suppose there are some things that can be helpful, but it still comes down to, I don't feel guilty anymore. I've let that go. And you can do that. And people don't realize that. We have more control. I was just reading a great book on neurobiology and managing the emotional system we have and the feeling systems that we have in our brain. And you do have to learn to regulate and manage your emotional system, which is the deeper system. The less deep system is the feeling system. And so you can manage that. And the better you manage that, the more whole and healthy you'll be. So I worked on that. And he said, okay, now I'll give you one more help. The only one that I know of. If you let go of all the guilt with your mom and don't feel guilty around her anymore, what are the downsides? Well, there are no downsides, Reggie. What do you mean downsides? I would be happy. I feel great. That's what I've come here to pay you to help me do, for heaven's sakes. Come on, let's get on with it. And as though he's a magician. And everybody comes thinking we might have some magical powers. And maybe in some ways we do, but I hope it's for good and it is for deep wisdom, not just for ourselves. And he said, no, because if you have downsides or you would have let go of the guilt by now. Well, so I already know you have downsides because if you didn't have any, you'd let it go. Well, he was right about that. I couldn't argue with him about that, but I don't know. And then all of a sudden something came to me. And I started to envisioning no guilt around my mom. What would that be like? We wouldn't have a relationship. What relationship would we have? Yeah. Panic.
Yeah.
Now I know why I hold on to the guilt. Because if I let it go, now what kind of relationship do mom and I have? Mm. That's a whole, I don't know if she can do that. I don't know if I can do that. But I can see why I might not want to do that. The other could be other types of downsides. Someone will think I'm selfish. Someone will think I'm not Christian enough if I don't feel more guilt. Someone will think I'm not healthy enough, not nice enough. Not whatever, I should be, there's a lot of different downsides that can go with why we don't let go of things. But that's where the power is to move forward, is to find out what's the hurdles. And I think family systems and a systems understanding of emotions and life and how people interact on a deeper level, the systems emotional field, if you can understand the downsides and understand those things that you weren't used to looking at, you can really move forward. And then all of a sudden I'm going, well, can I live without mom? Do I have mom anyway? If our relationship is based on guilt and shame, what kind of relationship have we got here? I mean, what am I losing? I need to, but then I won't have the same. I won't have the chance to keep fantasizing that one day she will change and be the mom I always wanted.
There it is.
I'd have to give up that fantasy. So there's a lot of reasons why I might want to hold on to that guilt. And he said, so don't let go of that guilt too quickly. It just might be a little too hard. I said, and now you're telling me to hold on to it. What is wrong with you?
What kind of therapy session is this?
What kind of therapy session is this? But he was absolutely right. He knew how the system operated. He knew how my system operated. And he could then speak wisdom about that in a way that might even look, you would go right rather than going left, but left looks like the right way to go. And that's where he said, and I tell many people, I said, hey, you want to give up that depression? And I understand about medical depression, clinical depression. So I'm not talking about people who need treatment, but I'm saying, let's say depression. I'm not ready to give up my depression yet. And that's not always a simple thing to do. And none of this is simple. So I don't want anyone to think you just wake up and it's all perfect. But you can be midwifed or shepherded into doing that. That's the good news. And that's where maybe someone like me comes in. Giving up that depression. Well, here's another downside. If I give up my depression, or if I give up my guilt and shame, who am I? I don't know. This is what I've always lived with. I don't know. So I'm not ready. I don't know if I'm ready to give that up, because it will leave a hole or a gap. And those holes or gaps are right where we need to grow. And I think about, I don't know if you ever saw Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Oh, yeah.
The Indiana Jones. Oh, The Last Crusade. The movie that was The Last Crusade. They go after the chalice, you'd think I'd know what that was.
The Holy Grail?
But Holy Grail. Grail. I have memory blips. The Holy Grail. And he goes out to the edge of this cliff.
Yes, my favorite scene. This is my favorite scene. I love this scene.
And he's supposed to just take one more step.
Yes.
And it's the gap.
Yes.
And when somebody lets go of their guilt and shame, they're ready to take one more step and see where they go. Will they fall crashing down to the bottom?
Yeah.
Or as they turn the camera, you now see a path that helps you move, and you're on solid ground. And what I found is you're on solid ground when you go to those gaps of that. Then you start being really you.
Yes, and amen. And what I love about that scene, and I watched that scene so many times, because that's what this podcast effectively is all about: getting outside your comfort zone, trusting, and taking that leap of faith. And so I use that scene as a metaphor all the time when I'm speaking. And one of the things that I love about that scene is Harrison Ford puts his hand under his shirt on his heart.
He does, yes.
Yes, because he's trusting in
moment.
Yes, it's such a powerful movie. I love that scene.
And his choice to do that, but it was like, do I turn around and go back and say, no, I don't know how to get across this ravine? I don't know how to let go of my guilt. Or do I let go of my guilt and then take one more step?
Yeah.
And he did that.
Yeah. Yeah.
You could walk all the way across. And that's what I found in my own life I could do, and others as well. But you have to get to those places where we get beyond our programming, beyond our the way all of our thoughts and emotional life are put together. Mm-hmm. And they're put together in a certain way. And I help people to mess with that so that they can be more whole.
In your work, Jerry, and also in your history there with the religious background and faith, how does your relationship to God influence your work now when you're working with people? Do you feel guidance? Do you feel, I need to say this right now? I need to be quiet right now. I feel I need to read this book right now. How does God play into your life right now with all the wisdom and knowledge you have and you've acquired? I'm interested to know that actual experience from your perspective with your deep faith, but also your deep knowledge, how those kind of come together when you're working with clients. What's that experience like?
For me, the best way to be spiritual is to be fully human. Because God didn't create me to be Jesus. He didn't create me to be an angel. He didn't create me. He created me as a human being. I'm assuming that's what we all understand. And so that's what he made me to be. So I want to be the best, healthiest, and most mature, wisest, knowledgeable human being I can be. And then things fall into place that I think actually fall into place along biblical or spiritual guidelines. Because I don't think the Bible and spiritual guidelines are there to beat us over the head to be something we're not. I think they're describing if we were fully who we were to be, that's what we would be. That is explaining how we would be.
Right.
Many people say, well, if you're talking about self-focus all the time, aren't you working against selfish? Aren't you working for selfishness? No, not at all. The most selfish people I know are often and many times have been the most selfless. Now, what I mean by that is I'm not against sacrifice. I'm not against giving. I'm not against giving when it hurts. I'm not against any of that. But, he did complain about the Sadducees and Pharisees and how like they were whitewashed sepulchers and, because they would do all the rules, but it wasn't down deep. It wasn't their heart. They were just doing the religious show. And I think a lot of codependents and a lot of Christians will do the show thinking that, and I'm not judging anybody. I'm just saying this is what is happening. I can't judge anybody. My life has plenty of problems, I am far from able to be a judge of other people, but I can say, wait a minute, this wonderful giving over functioning Christian, are they doing all of that for the right reasons? Number one. And then number two, how many times will they misstep because they don't know themselves truly? And that misstep can be injurious to others. We may not love others.
What does injurious mean? Can you explain
an
that word?
Injury. It would injure other people.
Okay. Sorry. Go ahead.
Be injurious. It would be you're injuring somebody and not know it.
Mm.
And how many Christians do I know have injured other people because they weren't whole themselves? So that's why that self-focus is so important. Because if I know me and I know my God or how I operate in a spiritual way, the best that I can then I'm much less likely to injure other people, sin more, whatever the guidelines you would be thinking about. Now, in terms of guiding me, again, my guidance is what guides me is the knowing that this is what I've just always felt like I should be teaching and doing. I don't know why. I don't know why that was. I'm not the best vessel to, believe it or not. Oh my gosh, I'm about one of the last vessels that ought to be talking about this stuff. But it's like I can't do anything but that.
Mm.
In fact, when I started my YouTube channel, I think it was back in 2012, I didn't care whether anybody listened. I didn't care whether I had any kind of viewership or subscriptions. I felt like it needed to be talked about.
Mm-hmm.
So I just talked about it. And I thought if it helps one person, that's great. And then I began to learn in this paradoxical way, anything worth doing is worth doing poorly.
Oh, say that again. Because that's the opposite to what my family taught me. Go ahead, say it again.
Oh, no, it is the opposite. Anything worth doing is worth doing poorly. Try to disprove that.
Oh, I get it. The value in something that is truly meaningful to the spirit, to the valuable to others. Hey, even if you can't do it well, it's better than and just do it poorly. Then
it's better than not doing it at all.
Than not doing it at all. Yeah,
exactly. So I started doing these videos poorly, and it was worth doing. It was still worth doing, and I knew it was worth doing because how it had changed my life. And I just was ever so grateful to Dr. Stoneberg, and just even to this day. Murray Bowen, we talk about Murray Bowen, family systems. He was the grandfather of family therapy. He was the one that came up with an emotional triangle or a relationship triangle. He's the guy who started talking about that. And he was a psychiatrist who looked at, let's say, schizophrenia on an individual basis, treating the patient as a client or as a patient who has schizophrenia. Then he got a grant and he brought in the whole family and worked with the family for 6 months, several families with several patients. It changed his whole way of looking at the disease.
Wow.
The more enmeshed the family was emotionally, the more psychotic the patient was. The more self-differentiated the family was, the more healthy the family was, and the patient too.
Incredible.
He wrote about that, and that was the beginning of Murray Bowen Family Systems. And we had not seen it that way before. He was one of the first ones to go, oh, we're all connected. The family is the family is in you the rest of your life. The family is in you the beginning and all the way through your life. And now that could be the good parts and the bad parts. What we want to do is get the bad parts out of us, take the good parts, but we want to become ourselves regarding the bad parts.
This is great. Okay, so I wanted to kind of touch on this when you first mentioned it, because maybe people haven't heard of family systems before, but I think we've kind of got a lot of groundwork for family systems. So what I just learned from you is that a healthy family system is one in which the individuals are self-differentiated and they respect each other. And then one that is unhealthy or malignant is this enmeshed sort of like, you don't have barriers. You don't know where you stop and they begin. No boundaries.
No cell walls. And that's true for cells.
Yes.
It's true for viruses. It's true for planets. It's true. And in fact, there was a book I just had. Oh yeah. It's called Making Sense of Human Life. Murray Bowen's determined effort towards family systems theory. He's talking about human life, but he's also talking about life in the universe. Because he was a doctor, he was a scientist, and he'd say, what happens in families happens in cells. What happens in cells happens with viruses. What happens with viruses? He says it's bacteria. And what happens with bacteria and what happens with families happens with cancer. And just everything is the same. We are just a bigger part of this process. And if you can understand that, it would guide you on how you can function and not become a malignant cell, a cancerous cell.
Right.
And also to disconnect from the cancer that you may have, been programmed to be. And so when to turn right rather than left. If you don't have a systems view, you will often miss the turns. You'll miss which way to turn because you're not seeing the map in a biological way. And that's for emotional relationships. For example, if you came to me, a couple sits down, they're mad at me because their marriage is failing. And of course, I can't save their marriage. I can only help them be better them. How do you if they don't want to save their marriage, how am I going to save their marriage for them? I'm not married to either one of them. But now they're mad at me and they come in and they go, Jerry, you are the worst therapist in the world. You would naturally do or say what?
Defend yourself. No, I'm not.
Exactly. Wrong turn. What are you going to gain by defending yourself?
In that circumstance,
you're
nothing.
Not going to convince them.
Yeah, exactly.
You're not going to convince them. Their being upset with you has almost nothing to do with you, but you're defending yourself. So now you're becoming more enmeshed with them through this. I'm accusing, you're defending, I'm accusing, you're defending. So when they come in, I would turn a different way and go, you're probably right. What seems to be the problem?
How did they react to that?
They go, well, what? You haven't fixed us. Yes, you're right. I have a terrible time knowing how to do that. What seems to be going on?
It's like a Jedi mind trick.
And what's a Jedi mind trick about it is it's self-differentiation. I have stayed in place emotionally in the system, neither reacting nor defending, but stayed connected and remained myself with them, which elevates me and elevates them. If you start defending and reacting, then you go down into the mud with them. Well, what good luck? I mean, it's all going to be a mess. They're going to end up quitting. They're going to end up saying, oh, well, you're a terrible therapist. I'm going to tell everybody how awful you are, as you are defending to them how good of a therapist you are, which is a waste of time. Because it's not even about my credentials, my abilities, it's not about that. And that's one of the things that's cool about self-differentiation and family systems. You start realizing what's the symptoms and what's the real problem. And you don't react to symptoms, you function in a way to deal with what's underneath. And that's very, very powerful for healing you, interacting with others. So you recognize more what are symptoms. And when somebody comes and says, oh, you're the worst therapist in the world, it's impossible for me to be the worst one. How are we going to figure that out? How did you guys figure that out?
How did you figure that out? Wow.
That
Where's
I'm
the leaderboard?
Yeah. Oh, world. Wow. That's done a lot of work in the last week.
Oh, man.
Because it's ridiculous. It's clearly ridiculous. But I'm not going to tell them it's ridiculous. I don't need to make fun. I'm not here to make fun of them I realize this is what they're doing. And the very thing they're doing now with me is what doesn't work with them. And if I can say, when do you remember was the first time you thought somebody wasn't good at what they did as either a parent or a caregiver or because I just stand in for all that. I'm not married to them. I didn't grow up with them. They don't know me. They don't even know me fully. And then we start looking at, or have you ever thought your spouse was just terrible? And again, when I'm blaming, I'm avoiding looking at me. That's the whole purpose of blaming. Blaming is to avoid self-awareness. And I always tell people, stop blaming your narcissistic parents. Oh, well, why are you defending them? Oh, I'm not defending your parents at all. They may have been horrible. And what they did was wrong. Clearly, I'll grant you that. I'm not taking away any of that. It's just, I think you're going to waste your time blaming them.
Yeah.
And you're going to miss what you can do to change you. So let me help you stop the blaming and start thinking about how can you function better. That's going to be much more helpful to you than let's all have a blame fest together. And a lot of support groups are blame fests.
Yeah.
And I've been in AA groups and 12-step groups, and I've been, and it so many times. And I'm not against those support groups. They can be very helpful and are very helpful. But you can also have the blaming fest going on, and everybody walks away, and they all just, had their blaming fest, and then walk away going, I feel so much better. You may feel better, but you're not one iota changed.
Thank you for sharing that. I knew this conversation would be fascinating. And one of the questions that I had for you that I really want to hear your answer to is, from all the people and the clients and the patients and the people that you've worked with, when you are out for a long drive, when you're out maybe for a morning walk, and you're kind of reflecting upon the things that you've learned, and you start to see patterns, or you start to see life as this whole, what are some of the best insights or the things that you find so fascinating, so beautiful, so interesting about human behavior, about this human condition, about the human experience and journey?
Well, I think one of the most wonderful things and I don't know how it happened. We can say God, we can say the universe. I'm not trying to preach religion to anybody. I'm just, whatever your higher power is or whatever, we are here, and that we we actually have a capacity to regulate ourselves in a world that's trying to kill us, basically. I mean, that's the world. We live on a knife edge all the time. And yet we still survive, and that we still can do good, still can love other people, and even love ourselves. And then we can regulate our emotions, our thoughts, our minds, and also discover our purpose and our direction. And I remember early on as a younger man being very codependent, always worried, shame, guilt-ridden, blah, blah, blah. We go through a whole bunch of stuff. And I was an adult child of sexual abuse and different things that went on. I had good times. I had bad times, as many of us have. We've experienced both. I felt so codependent, always anxious, overridden with anxiety. And believe it or not, anxiety is one of the biggest problems in the universe and in biology. It's that angst. It is a life force, but it also too much. Here, do you think it's good that families be close?
Yes.
Yeah, I think we'd both agree with that. Do you think it's good that families be over close?
No.
Right. That's one of the paradoxes in the world and in systems. You want to be close, but not over close.
Mm-hmm.
That's unhealthy. You want to be separate, but not overly separate.
Yeah.
So we have to balance the forces of togetherness and separateness throughout all the universe. And that's what happens in medicine and science and biology. And we have an ability as humans to be able to, and as I mentioned, I was anxiety ridden all the time, never felt at ease, didn't know who I was. I don't know. Self-confidence was low. I could sing and I could do music, but I felt I had stage fright. I was not in a good place. And if someone would have come to me and said, one day you're not going to feel this way, I would say, number one, you're probably crazy. Number two, that will never happen. Number three, I have no idea how it would even happen. So, unless I'm magic. Well, and I was looking for magic in a spiritual way. Well, maybe God will just boom, I won't have this. Well, God doesn't do as many booms like that. Now, he may. That's up to him. He can do all the booms he wants. But I'm not sure that everybody gets a miracle. And so for me to feel that way now and later in life that I don't feel that way anymore is such a miracle. Even to this day, I go, I could never have thought I would have a sense of calmness or sense of self. Like I'm far from perfect as a self-differentiated individual. And in fact, you don't ever become a 10 on a 10 scale. But I may have gone a couple of points up.
Yeah.
And it just makes all the difference in the world. I could have never, I would have said it wouldn't have been possible. And to have that sense of who I am, what I want, even with hardships, I have plenty of hardships like everybody else has got. I'm not free of difficulties in my life by any means. And people will say, oh, well, then your life must be, if you're self-differentiated, then your life must be perfect. That isn't what self-differentiation means. It doesn't mean your life is perfect. It means we can work on being self-differentiated in the midst of difficulties and problems.
I love that.
So the wisdom would be that is possible. And for us to be able to do that and to accomplish that is just, and that's why I did a program. I have a program available so people can work on that. Because I thought I'm not going to live forever. And I wanted to at least have something out there that people could continue to because I don't see that in a lot of people just keep turning right when they should be turning left.
Yeah, yeah.
And I see that. And if, as you learn to become more self-differentiated, as all of us do, we then can pick up on, oh, they're turning right. They should be turning left. Why are you just,
Yeah,
you
totally.
just start to see more, and you have a clarity of thought and in terms of seeing.
That's beautiful. And what a beautiful gift too, that in your experience of that journey, now creating a course and doing this as your life's work, to share that gift. And when it is one of those powerful gifts, you can't help but share it. It's just so inspiring. It's so you're just like, I have to tell people about this.
And again, and I do it poorly, but it's still worth doing.
It's still worth doing. That's beautiful. Well, Jerry, I have a couple questions left for you here before we wrap this up. This has been a very fascinating conversation for me, and I really hope that the listeners and viewers out there are enjoying this as well. I'm sure they are. Some of my favorite questions to ask my guests are around this. Two last questions here. I have one called the golden ticket. So for you, Jerry, when you, some people, they're all about the money. Some people are all about the feedback. They get a letter in the mail, or they get their customer review, or it's the smile on somebody's face. What's the golden ticket moment for you that you're like, this is why I do what I do? This is just, it just hits me in all the good feels, and I just feel like I'm fulfilled and I'm doing my purpose work.
When people will write to me and respond to me on YouTube and emails and things like that, and say the things that I said when I worked with Dr. Stoneberg, that's what I was looking for.
Yeah.
And what's even better, because as you become more self-differentiated, and another word for self-differentiated is mature, but it is different, because mature may not be a systems way of thinking. It is maturity, but it's a systems maturity. It's a self in the system. Maturity is just a self. And everything that's self-differentiated is self in the system. And in fact, there is no other self than a self who's in the system. Many people talk about self-esteem. Well, okay, I know what self-esteem is, but there is no self-esteem outside the self in the system. There's no separate, you're not that separated from all of the universe and your family and all of society, and you can't, you're never not connected. So when we think about the individual, I understand we're individuals, yes, but individuals are always operating within a system. Always. Even if nobody else is in the room. When a couple sits down, I work with them, I'm working with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 families. Because it's my family, me, them, all those people are in the room when we're talking.
Oh, interesting.
And if I could zoom out and see that, don't you think my answers would be different than if I didn't zoom out and see that? And they may not be as helpful. So when I hear people get that, and I can tell when they have, it's like, because it is an experiential. Once you get it, you kind of go, oh my gosh, I can't unget this.
You can't unsee it. Yeah, because it's self-evident once you see it. Like, okay, yeah, this is just how it is now.
Yikes. And I will tell people, I'm sorry, I messed your life up, but but you asked me to.
Yeah.
So that's one of that means a lot to me. But as someone who's self-differentiated, it doesn't make me who I am. The compliments, the praise has nothing to do with who I am. It's a response from them in their experience telling me. So how am I going to get a big head? It's not, they're talking about them. Now they're grateful and they're saying, we're so thankful that you did this. And I'm thrilled. And if somebody says, oh, you're so wonderful, you're so good, I certainly would say, thank you. I mean,
yeah.
But I also know it's, I wish it were just me, I wish it were just, I was a genius. But I've kind of gotten over that.
Yeah. Oh,
To
I
some
love
degree. Some degree.
that. My last question for you, Jerry, is a fun one, and I'm not sure if you're aware, but I was an actor before I started doing podcasting, and I would hang out a lot of times on set before they were setting up the lights and the cameras and whatnot. And I was bored, and so this question just kind of popped into my head. So it's kind of an unusual but fun question. So just giving you a little context here, so you're like, where does that come from? But so I went around on the film set while we were waiting, and I was asking the other actors and actresses this question, and the question is a fun one, and their answers were so unique. So I just adopted it into my podcast, and I ask all my guests at the end. So here's the question, Jerry: if you had on your wall a magic painting. And this painting, whenever you looked at this magic painting, you could feel any feeling you wanted to feel to any degree that you wanted to feel it. What feeling would you choose? And what would be on your painting to represent that for you?
Well, I would say peace, the feeling of peace, because calmness or peace is the antidote to anxiety. And people always want to get rid of anxiety so they can feel calmness, rather than working on calmness and peace to get rid of the anxiety. They like doing the other way, but it's not as effective as working on the other. That's why I have a video called Calmness is Everything. So peace, the feeling of peace or peacefulness, and what would be on the painting?
It could be abstract. It could be an actual picture.
Right. I was trying to think. I think of it as, when you see synapses and the brain, or brain synapses or nerve synapses, how it kind of looks like a spider. There's all of these spiders, and it's just flowing so regularly. All the charging is going through those just very regular ways. And it's almost a healing of the synapses and as they work. And, those are chemical firings and things like that, but it's all doing as it should. It's doing as it should.
Now, what colors do you see? Do you have oranges, yellows? Do you have any specific colors that are popping?
Whites, grays.
Okay.
And I have a background of blue.
Yeah.
I see a background of blue. Don't know why. Just and then I would see like red going through, so I could see the red progress of all these firings going on.
Awesome.
But they're even.
Yeah,
when you
balanced.
have EEG.
Yeah.
The EEG on your head, it checks when you have a misfire. And so there are no misfires in this. These are all firing as they should fire.
Okay, this is fantastic, Jerry. And before I asked you this question, when I interview my guests, I try in my mind imagine what they're going to say, what they're going to answer this question with. And so my thought was you were going to say something about freedom, something about this idea, this sense of self, of being free in yourself, to be self-individuated.
That's a good one too. That's probably my second choice.
Yeah, and then my second thought was peace. He's going to say something about peace. And so you hit peace, and I was like, okay, good, I was close.
I got peace. And that one would be right there up there with it.
So the follow-up question that I find so interesting to also ask people is, if somebody has never experienced this unique type of peace that you're explaining to me here with this picture, how would you explain it to them that it feels in your body?
It would feel like having either sitting or standing, and your feet are on the ground or the floor, but you're not on the floor. The floor or ground is holding you up.
So there's like this deep support coming up from the floor into you.
Deep support coming this way.
Whoa. I have never heard anyone explain peace this way. And this is the reason I ask people this, because now I get to feel it. And as an actor, I love understanding emotions and helping different people feel things. So thank you, Jerry, for sharing that.
That's a whole different way of experiencing that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's cool.
And most of the time we're thinking about how gravity is pulling us down.
Yeah.
Also, the earth and the world is holding us up.
Yeah.
And remember, when people say, oh, someday I'd like to go to outer space, that's where you live. We are in outer space. What do you mean going to outer space? Where do you think you're living?
Yeah.
You're living in space.
Yeah.
We're just a planet, and this whole.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Well, thank you. Thank you for answering that question and sharing that. It's a beautiful representation, and also what I feel too. Correct me if I'm wrong. That's probably what you have experienced in your life through your journey, and also what's probably a lot of the people that you work with experience too. Is this feeling of support and peace that they've finally found this. Freedom from that anxiety and that pressure from those challenging situations. So it's that's where I think the magic painting is such a fascinating question, because it so closely relates to someone's purpose or their just driving force, or this sort of light that emits out of them, that I think is so unique and fascinating to hear individuals express that and then share what it feels like for them. Because then I'm like, oh man, now I'm going to walk around the rest of the day, Jerry, thinking about how this peace, the earth is supporting me, and I can feel this peace just like you explained it. So it's a gift to me and to, I'm hoping, many other people that are listening.
Because that was the shift that I felt. Mm-hmm. It was a paradoxical shift. It wasn't me walking heavily on the earth. It was the earth holding me up.
Oh, that's so awesome.
And
I love that. I love that. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast. Before we wrap up, is there any, I know you have courses and you have a website and you have a wonderful YouTube channel. We're going to link all that in the description, in the show notes below. But is there a message that you'd like to leave the audience with, or something you want to share before we wrap up?
If someone's looking for help, don't give up. You may have to look, and you may have to keep looking. There are answers for you out there. And I chose not to give up. And I looked high and low. From exorcisms to therapy to, whatever I could do to change my life. And I think because I had a genuine desire to be different or to change, somehow that was granted to me. And I'd say, don't give up. And it's never too late to have a happy childhood, because your inner child is still in you, and you are either going to love them or not. And if you don't love them, they're not going to have a happy childhood. If you do love them, they can have a happy childhood now.
Beautiful. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you so much for this. This has been fantastic. I really appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for listening, for watching. Jerry, all the best to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me and letting me talk so much.
It was great. Thank you, Jerry.
Well, that's it, everyone. Thank you so much for watching this episode all the way to the end. Thank you, Jerry, for being on the show and sharing your wisdom and insights and laughs with me. I really enjoyed it. If you want to be a part of the podcast after party with Jerry Wise and myself, head on over to timeiscome.com and sign up, and you can get the link to join the after party, where you can ask a question to Jerry or myself, and we can continue this conversation. Now, I also have a reflection question for you before you go. I like to do this at the end of my podcast just so that you can have something to chew on. Now, I mentioned this question at the beginning of the podcast as one of my favorite parts of this episode, which was, what are the downsides that may be there to letting go of a negative behavior or emotion that you have, that you've been trying to get rid of, but you haven't acknowledged these downsides of letting it go? Maybe there's a hidden benefit that you enjoy this, that's really helping you. So if there's something that pops into your mind that you can think of, maybe take a moment and journal about it. I know for myself, this has been very helpful to acknowledge the things that I'm secretly getting under the table, a hidden benefit to maybe a downside that I didn't want to acknowledge. And once I acknowledge that and I see it and I look at it, I can shift my perspective and I can move forward. So hopefully that'll be the case for you too. Last thing I want to say is scammers. There's always scammers out there. Be careful of the scammers in the comments. Watch out for them. They're pretending to be me, my friends, other people, trying to get your information, trying to tell you that they're going to private message you. So please be aware of the scammers out there. I'm not private messaging anybody. I'm not in a relationship with anybody, commenting to them in a private message group. So if you're speaking with someone, know it's a scammer, and please block them, report them. Thank you so much for watching this episode of the podcast, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.